Federalist 69, Part 3. We're going to start at paragraph 6. On the screen, as you can see, I have mentioned C-SPAN multiple times, as this is one of the best resources for you to learn about American civilization. So is libraryofcongress.gov. And then for the founding era, Teaching American History has a lot of great resources. National Constitution Center right now has lots of resources as well as lectures about the Constitution. National Archives is when you can actually see a lot of documents there. And they also have a lot of lectures there. But C-SPAN, focus on C-SPAN. All the professors that I've talked about, all the scholars that I've talked about, that will make understanding of American history a little easier. You can have access to them there, at least to their lectures, not to them necessarily, but to their lectures and talks and maybe panel discussions. This Federalist is pretty long. Please make sure you watch Federalist 69 Part 1 and Part 2, and then I'm just going to start reading it. The only thing you got to keep in mind or remember from Part 1 is that the anti-federalist that he names by his pseudonym is Tammany, Tamony, and he actually shows it in this paper himself. So when I get there, actually I will read what Hamilton himself puts in this paper. Paragraph 6 of Federalist 69. The President is to be the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States, and of the militia of the several states, when called into the actual service of the United States. He is to have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment, to recommend to the consideration of Congress such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient, to convene on extraordinary occasions both houses of the legislature or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, to adjourn them to such a time as he shall think proper, to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and to commission all officers of the United States. In most of these particulars, the powers of the President will resemble equally that of the King of Great Britain and of the Governor of New York. The most material points of difference are these. First, the President will have only the occasional command of such part of the militia of the nation as by legislative provision may be called into the actual service of the Union. The King of Great Britain and the Governor of New York have at all times the entire command of all the militia within their several jurisdictions. In this article, therefore, the power of the President would be inferior to that of either the monarch or the governor. So just a brief word here. If we have a bad president, then this power is actually extremely dangerous, because if the Congress is weak and really not wise, then the president can, in a small situation, create a big emergency and make it look like it's a big emergency and totally abuse this power. So just keep that in mind. Second, the President is to be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. In this respect, his authority would be nominally the same with that of the King of Great Britain, but in substance much inferior to it. it would amount to nothing more than the supreme command and direction of the military and naval forces. As first general and admiral of the Confederacy, while that of the British King extends to the declaring of war and to the raising and regulating of fleets and armies, all which by the Constitution under consideration would appertain to the legislature. Then here Hamilton himself says, read the footnote, and I'll read that for you. A writer in a Pennsylvania paper, under the signature of Tammany, has asserted that the King of Great Britain owes his prerogative as Commander-in-Chief to an annual mutiny bill. To an annual mutiny bill. The truth is, on the contrary, that his prerogative in this respect is immemorial as well, and was only disputed contrary to all reason and precedent, as Blackstone, Volume 1, page 262. William Blackstone was probably the most famous authority on the Constitution of the laws of Britain. It says, as Blackstone in Volume 1, page 262 expresses it, by the long Parliament of Charles I, but by the statute of the 13th of Charles II, chapter 6, it was declared to be in the king alone for that sole supreme government and command of the militia within his majesty's realms and dominions, and of all forces by sea and land, and of all forts and places of strength, ever was and is the undoubted right of his majesty and his royal predecessors, kings and queens of England, and that both or either House of Parliament can nor ought to pretend to the same. And then we go back to the text of the Federalist. The governor of New York, on the other hand, is by the Constitution of the state invested only with the command of its militia and navy. But the constitutions of several of states expressly declare their governors to be commanders-in-chief, as well of the army as navy. And it may well be a question whether those of New Hampshire and Massachusetts in particular do not, in this instance, confer larger powers upon their respective governors than could be claimed by a president of the United States. So again, he's comparing the powers that are given to the president, and he's actually refuting all these allegations that all the powers are like, sometimes even more than the powers that the King of Britain has. He says, no, look at the governors of different states, and what the president, authorities that the president have, is kind of reflective of what different states have given their governors. Third, the power of the president in respect to pardons would extend to all cases except those of impeachment. The governor of New York may pardon in all cases, even in those of impeachment, except for treason and murder. Is not the power of the governor in this article on a calculation of political consequences greater than that of the president? All conspiracies and plots against the government which have not been matured into actual treason may be screened from punishment of every kind by the interposition of the prerogative of pardoning. If a governor of New York, therefore, should be at the head of any such conspiracy until the design had been ripened into actual hostility, he could ensure his accomplices and adherents an entire impunity. A president of the Union, on the other hand, though he may even pardon treason, when prosecuted in the ordinary course of law, could shelter no offender in any degree from the effects of impeachment and conviction. So see, this is a wise thing that the Constitutional Convention has come up with. Would not the prospect of a total indemnity for all the preliminary steps be a greater temptation to undertake and preserve in an enterprise against the public liberty than the mere prospect of an exemption from death and confiscation? If the final execution of the design upon an actual appeal to arms should miscarry, would this last expectation have any influence at all when the probability was computed that the person who was to afford that exemption might himself be involved in the consequences of the measure and might be incapacitated by his agency in it from affording the desired immunity? The better to judge of this matter, it will be necessary to recollect that by the proposed Constitution, the offense of treason is limited to levying war upon the United States and adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort, and that by the laws of New York, it is confined within similar bounds. Fourth, the President can only adjourn the national legislature in the single case of disagreement about the time of adjournment. The British monarchy may prorogue or even dissolve the Parliament. The governor of New York may also prorogue the legislature of this state for a limited time, a power which in certain situations may be employed to very important purposes. So he constantly says, look, the president is nothing like the King of Britain with absolute authority, another thing like that. And he compares it constantly with the other state governors.